Thanks. It's so loud. Thank you everyone for coming. I know we're kind of a small little crowd tonight. That's okay. Just to kind of give you a brief, there are 4 events going on in our amazing valley tonight. There's a 60 Minutes thing with Vail Symposium. There's a 7 Summits thing at the Gravity House. And then there's another speaker at the library. We are all within like 3 blocks of each other. And they all started at 6 o'clock and they're all like, it's crazy. So we had a lot of competition tonight. But welcome and thank you for coming to the Colorado Snow Sports Museum. We do have some people on Zoom. So thank you for being on Zoom. We really appreciate it. And yeah, so this is the final one of our series. Rudi Hartman was scheduled for January, and then we all know what happened in January. We couldn't do it, so we pushed it back to tonight, and we just chose March, and this was the date that we chose, and then all of the competition that we have. So, hi, John, you can come. You're fine. Slide right in. So thank you. And thank you to Cindy and Moses for volunteering their time, and Caitlin and Diana and Ashley and the entire staff, and Dana down in Denver. It sounds like a lot of people, but we really are a very small museum. We have 2 full-time staff and 4 part-timers and about 10 volunteers. So thank you. We do have some we have some what I would consider Vail royalty in the audience. So Sandy Ferguson, her mom was Widge, like Widges. It's my favorite run on Vail Mountain. And you have a long history, and Bill Wilto, and Pete Thompson, you've been here for a long time. So we have a lot of people in the audience tonight. So thank you. So now I'm going to introduce Rudi Hartman. Rudi was here before, and it was so fun to have him that we brought him back. So, and then Rudi's going to introduce all of our speakers tonight. And Rudi really put all this together. So thank you, Rudi, for all your time. And Rudi is a museum member and is a big fan of the museum. So thank you, Rudi, for being here, and so excited. And thank you for your time. Everyone who's here and presenting tonight receives, it's all in gratis to the museum. And we're just so grateful for all the people. And I appreciate everyone who came tonight. So thank you.
Jen, thank you so much for inviting me again to Vail on a beautiful day.
I know.
So, January would have been a little bit different. Okay.
Yes. And we do have to talk into the microphone because that's the only way.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Rudi Hartman. I'm with the University of Colorado, Denver. I spent some time in Boulder as well, but I'm affiliated with a smaller department in Denver, the big city near Lodo. And so here we are in Vail, and we have a panel tonight that focuses on the Vail Pass area as one of the habitats of the lynx in Colorado, the reintroduced lynx in Colorado. The Aspen, the Vail Pass area has become also a very popular winter ski area. And that's another topic we want to explore. And most of all, we want to talk about the relationship between the lynx and the winter recreationists. Specifically, we want to address the question and try to answer the question, can the Canada lynx and the outdoor enthusiasts share the Vail Pass recreation area? So that's our main issue tonight. And we have 3 experts here. And the next one. 3 experts here, presenters. We have Jake Ivan, we have Elizabeth Roberts, and we have Cal Orlowski here. Jake Ivan is a senior scientist with the Colorado Department of Parks and Wildlife in Fort Collins. Liz Roberts is an ecologist with the White River National Forest, and Kaylin is the mountain sports ranger at the nearby district here, National Forest District, the Holy Cross, Eagle Holy Cross Range District. So he comes from Minterm here. And we are glad to have them here. Next one, please. Yeah. Yeah. So few people, I argue, few people have seen a lynx. They are very solitary animals. They prefer dense forest environments, and they are largely nocturnal. Though I learned from Sandy, she saw a lynx when she lived up in Central City. And so that's something special. She first thought it was a bobcat. That's the closest. When we look at the lynx, it grows to about 30, maybe 35 inches. And it weighs, as an adult, 20 to 30 pounds. Okay. What you can see, they have very large feet, broad feet, and that allows the lynx to traverse snowy terrain. So, and we will learn much more about the lynx here. Then I have a picture here of two lynx here on Vail Pass. Here, can you see them? Oh yeah, okay. So I don't need that, that's my pointer. And Cal was so kind to give me this picture. One of the National Forest Rangers had the opportunity to take it. And it shows here a female lynx and a kitten. Yes, the lynx have produced litters. And now the lynx are a self-sustaining species in Colorado, okay? And we have, I believe, 6 or 8, maybe 9 adult lynx on Vail Pass, and of course, litter, the young ones. Okay, the next one. And of course, now Vail Pass is known for the road, but also for the winter recreation area. It's a large recreation area, 55,000 acres. It's a multi-use recreation area, and very popular with cross-country skiers, with snowshoers, with snowmobilers. My wife Kathy and I had the chance to snowshoe up at Vail Pass, and we stayed at one of the huts here. So one of the 10th Mountain Division huts. So it's a very attractive multi-use area. And it started with Vail Pass. Vail Pass was completed in 1940 as a 2-lane extension of Highway 6 from Summit County into Gore Creek. And it was Charlie Vail who designed Vail Pass, who was successful here. And in honor of that, the pass was named Vail Pass, okay? Let me say a few words about Charlie Vail. He was a very colorful guy, a very powerful guy, a well-known politician for about 15 years. And so he wanted to have his name on the map. He was the head of the highway department from 1930 to 45. And particularly in the mid and late 30s, he was one of the most powerful politicians of the state of Colorado. he was closely aligned with the Roosevelt administration in DC. So a lot of the Colorado projects, road projects, were financed by the Fed as part of the New Deal program. Charlie Vail was a Democrat, a fierce, outspoken Democrat. And he was successful. He got the money from DC, and he was able to expand the Colorado road system from about 400 in 1930 to about 4,000, more than 4,000 miles after the 40s. So he wanted to have his name on the map. So I tell you a little bit about Charlie Vail. He's not so known here in the village. He's getting better known, I think. And so we have a new biography of Charlie Vail. The author is Tom Noel. Maybe you heard the name. It's a historian at my university. He's also known as Dr. Colorado. And so he put this biography of about 200 pages together, and it tells the whole story of this colorful guy, a machine politician who was very successful. And so he wanted his name on a pass near Salida, southern Colorado. And it was Monarch Pass. And he redesigned Monarch Pass, and against the will of the folks from Salida, they had chosen a different route, but he didn't give a damn, and he did it. And it was built, was part of US Highway 50. And then it was completed 38, 39, new signs were put up by the highway department, and it said Vail Pass. And the locals were outrageous. Maybe the folks in Salida were Republicans, okay. And so they rejected the idea, and the result was that Monarch Pass remained Monarch Pass. So they had to find another pass road, and it was the pass road into Gore Creek. And in 1940, there was not a lot of settlements. It was very dispersed, 1940. It's long before the resort area of 1940. And so the name change went through. Governor Carr pushed it through. They developed a friendship, Carr and Charlie Vail. And so it became Vail Pass. And Vail Pass has become the more important pass compared to Monarch, and maybe one of the best known or most used passes, not only in Colorado, in the American West.
Did Vail Pass have a name before it was called Vail?
No, it was completed in 40, and then they started with the rename. Yeah, so I don't know whether there was a name. It was just a 2-lane road that dipped Highway 6, an extension of Highway 6 that dipped down into Gore Creek. So at that point, very few people lived there. And so now, of course, Vail Pass is well known and is now a multi-use area for skiers. Okay, and so next one, please. And so what we have is we have the overlap of one of the major lynx habitats in Colorado, and we have a winter recreation area. And of course, the question is, how do the lynx get along with the skiers, snowshoers, snowmobilers? And we'll hear her then a lot more about it, okay? But first, we wanna learn about how the lynx was reintroduced to Colorado. So, and we have an expert here, Dr. Jake Ivan. He has done years of research, maybe 15 years. He studied the lynx and also the main prey, which is the snowshoe hare. And he can tell us all about how, when, and why the Canada lynx was reintroduced to Colorado. And I hand it over to Jake.
It's not all one presentation. It'll just, yay, look at this.
Technology, we're off to a good start. Well, thank you, Rudy, for the introduction and the opportunity to be here tonight. Always enjoy talking about lynx to folks and really enjoy telling a reintroduction story because it's just a good story with a happy ending. So it's kind of an easy topic to talk about. So like Rudy mentioned, my job here is to sort of give you the background and set the stage, give you a little bit of history of lynx in this state and walk you through the reintroduction program and then sort of tee it up for Liz and Cal to tell you more about lynx response to winter recreation and how people in lynx get along or don't get along. So with that, let's dive into this. And we're going to start all the way back in the beginning. This is a map of historical occurrences of lynx in the lower 48. Okay, so some folks from the Rocky Mountain Research Station of the Forest Service went through the painstaking work of looking through museum specimens in all the states, looking through old trapping records, government records, trying to figure out which of those things might be actually probable lynx or verified lynx, and then plotting those on the map. And so here's what we have. So here's all the lynx occurrences from like 1842 up to about 1998 or so. A couple of take-home points here. First of all, there are quite a few occurrences in the state of Colorado, and that's important because Colorado Parks and Wildlife has always considered lynx to be a native species to the state, and this is the reason why. And there are folks who disagree with that notion, but that's always been sort of our position. Is there a native species? We have a mandate to manage and conserve all of the native species in the state. And when we figured out that they probably weren't here anymore, that was the main impetus for us to put them back. Also, you know that we are at the very, very southern tip of lynx range in the world. So it's mostly a northern species. You know, you find them mostly in Canada and Alaska, but they do dip down here, but we're sort of at the very edge. You don't have to go too far south of here and there are no more lynx. Okay, so with that as a historical backdrop, let's fast forward to sort of a random year, 1997. And the reason I picked this is this was the year that we actually decided to do something in terms of reintroducing lynx. And some of the reasons I talked about in the previous slide, one is we feel it was a native species, and so it was our responsibility to make sure it was here. It had been listed as endangered since 1973, due largely, we think, to unregulated predator control activities and unregulated trapping sort of in the early part of the 20th century, okay? And that's important because we didn't really think these two issues, which probably caused the original demise of lynx, were issues any longer, okay? So some of the threats were probably no longer threats. 74, the last known lynx was actually trapped in Colorado. That actually happened right here in our current backyard around Vail. From 78 to 97, our agency conducted at least 11 statewide surveys to try to find evidence of lynx in the state and didn't come up with much. There were a few tracks that were potentially lynx, but tracks are sort of notoriously difficult to identify given conditions, and so we weren't sure. But what we were sure of is if there were any present, it was only really, we were down to kind of the last handful of individuals. Certainly nothing that you would consider is adequate for a viable population. And we're also concerned, given sort of the lack of lynx habitat between us and the next most northern patch of habitat, that it might be a long time, if ever, before they repopulated the state. So this is when we made the decision to reintroduce the species. That actually started in 1999. The primary goal, as Rudy mentioned, was to establish a self-sustaining and viable population of lynx in the state. Okay. And we actually, came up with some criteria and definitions for what we meant by this. This is a pretty important list. It served as sort of the backdrop and the roadmap for us. It was sort of the list that we checked off as we went through time, and sort of told us when we were done and when we, could consider this to be a success. So one of the first things we wanted to see is release protocols that led to initial high survival of these individuals. You don't want to release them and have them all die, obviously. We also wanted to see some long-term decent survival of lynx in the state. We wanted them to develop fidelity to areas. Well, first of all, we hope they would stay in Colorado, but also find good places to stay in Colorado and not get themselves in trouble. Certainly, we wanted to see them breed. We wanted to see that breeding activity lead to survival of kittens. We hoped that some of those kittens would live and do well enough in Colorado that they would then breed and have kittens. And then maybe the most important thing, number 7 here, is over time, we wanted to see evidence that recruitment was outstripping mortality. And when that happens, you have, obviously a stable population or maybe something that's even increasing. So this is sort of the checklist or the objectives that we were working toward and measuring ourselves against. Here's how the whole thing kind of went down. So we got lynx from, 4 provinces and then Alaska. The numbers in each of these places are the numbers of lynx that we brought down into Colorado. These are the numbers that were released by year. If you look closely, you'll see we released a lot in the first couple of years. Then all of a sudden there's these weird zeros and then some more. The reason for that is early on, these first few years, we were using what's known as a hard release protocol. The idea was, let's get them from Canada or Alaska, from the wild there into the wild down here as quickly as possible. Let's not detain them. Let's minimize the time they're in captivity. That will be the best thing for them. And it turned out it wasn't the best thing for them. So we did have some problems with survival not being as high as we wanted. We had too many that starved. We had too many that were hit on highways and wandered to weird places, and it wasn't going as well as we wanted. So these years is when we took a pause to reassess what we were doing and how we were doing it and see if we could come up with a better idea. What we decided in 2003 is to continue releasing animals, but under a completely different protocol. And we adopted what's known as a soft release. So more like, if you're familiar with how they did wolves in Yellowstone, that kind of thing. We brought animals down and then we did hold them in captivity for weeks, if not months, okay? They underwent several veterinary checks. They got drugs and treatments if they needed it. They were allowed to recover from any trapping injuries that they might have sustained. And we fattened them up good and released them in late winter, early spring, when life is getting easier, as opposed to sort of the dead of winter. And we followed that protocol for the next several years and ultimately released a little over 200 of these things. Okay. Now, to measure against those benchmarks that I talked about, we had kind of 3 main data streams or activities that we used. First is all the animals had some sort of telemetry device. Most of them had satellite telemetry. So we got emails every day of sort of where they were. We also did a heck of a lot of snow tracking. It's literally just finding lynx tracks in the snow and following them. You can learn a heck of a lot about how far they travel in a day, where they like to sleep, where they like to eat, where they hunt successfully, where they don't, what they're eating, etc. So you can learn things about diet. That's what's depicted in the upper right-hand picture here. You can kind of make out there's a hind foot of a snowshoe hare here and another hind foot sort of facing you here. It's interesting. Lots of predators have sort of very unique ways of eating their prey. And this is very typical of lynx. When they catch snowshoe hare, they eat the whole darn thing, except they don't like the hind feet for whatever reason. Ears are fine, the head is fine, the skull is fine, the front feet are fine, but not the hind feet. Interesting little tidbit. Well, we did an awful lot of snow tracking. When you added up all the mileage over 10 years, our technicians snowshoed from here to Chicago and back again, following lynx. And then the other thing is we had annual trapping efforts, mostly because the batteries on the collars only lasted for so long. And we needed the collars to help us estimate survival, to help us find dens, to help us keep track of these things. And so we needed to keep those collars swapped out. So we had a good sample of lynx on the landscape. All right, so let's get into some of the things that we found and see how we measured up against our checklist of criteria here. So this is a graph of survival, and it's actually a graph of mortality. This is what mortality looks like after we had switched to the soft release protocol. So from 2003 onward. A couple of things here to note. There's two lines. The top line is mortality. These are all mortality as a function of the number of months that have elapsed since an individual was released. The top line are individuals that did not stay put in the San Juans or in Colorado where we wanted them to be. Their mortality rates are higher than the individuals that did stay put where we wanted them to be. Okay, so wandering wasn't a good thing. But in both cases, mortality is kind of high in the first handful of months after you're released, which makes sense. You have no idea where you are, where you should be, where life is going to be easier or not. But mortality quickly dives down and then levels out to actually pretty decent and low levels after about a year or so. So you can take my word for it that these kind of mortality curves are pretty good for reintroduced species and for a wild animal. So we were pretty happy with how that turned out. This is a graph of, or a figure of all of the lynx locations that we ever collected over the course of the project. One of the objectives was we wanted to see lynx exhibit some fidelity to Colorado and also good places in Colorado. This is a pretty impressive map because lynx obviously can get up and move if they want to, but also, you know, we didn't really want to see all of lynx traveling all over the West. But it is interesting that, boy, when they want to move, they can sure move. Most of this movement that you see here takes place in the summer. So it turns out when lynx in this part of the world are not tied to dens or kittens, they often just go on a summer vacation and go on a big walkabout and check stuff out, and often come right back to the same place. Yeah.
Is this just the 218 now?
Yep. This is just the 218. Exactly. Maybe the most impressive movement that we observed was this one. So we had a male that had established a home range down in Silverton and even had a good wife there and had fathered some litters, and then we lost him. We figured, well, the collar probably just died or the animal itself died. It happens. And then a year or two later, got a call from a trapper in Nordegg, Alberta that said, hey, I got a lynx with a collar on it and it has your name on it. So that's a pretty impressive movement of 1,100 miles or so. But again, that's not really what we wanted to see. But if you dig into this and actually look at it more closely, this is really what was happening behind the scenes. So what these polygons represent is the inner 90% of those locations, okay? And the inner 90% of those locations, the hottest, warmest colors being the highest use, and these being the lower, the blue being the lower use, most of that occurs in Colorado, and most of it occurs in places that we think are pretty decent lynx habitat. So think of this as if these were people, these are what lynx are doing when they're going to and from work, when they're picking up their kids at school, when they're getting groceries, getting gas, all those sorts of daily life activities are happening here. And what you're seeing with this is everybody's vacation and trips abroad and all that kind of stuff, okay? So in reality, even though it looks like there wasn't a lot of fidelity to good places, and there was.
Is there any correlation between where you release them and this?
All of them were released right down here.
Oh, okay.
Yep, every single one of them were released in here. Yep. So it makes sense. And we did that because we thought this was the best habitat. But some of them did find other places that were also decent habitat. If you drill down within those polygons, one thing you will find is lynx definitely exhibit fidelity or preference for this kind of habitat. So high elevation, north facing spruce fir stuff, older multi-storied forest with lots of big trees, lots of medium trees, lots of little trees, lots of structure in there. And the main reason for that is where you find their primary prey. So through all of the snow tracking we did, and of course in all the literature that exists for lynx elsewhere, this is the thing that they eat. So what we discovered over 10 years of snow tracking is about 70% of their diet is these guys. And in some years, it can be even 90% of their diet. That's basically all they eat. The only other thing they eat, the other 27% of the diet is red squirrels. So they really only eat kind of two things. This is their preference. When they can't find those, they eat those. And that is actually important. We'll come back to that because this has ramifications for their productivity patterns as well. So let's talk about reproduction for a second. These are examples of lynx dens. So lynx do not build dens. They don't dig holes or anything like that. They don't find caves like Yogi Bear or anything. What they do is they find the nastiest patch of deadfall that they can, jackstraw trees, often 3 or 4 layers thick or more, and they dump the kittens right underneath that good cover. So that's a typical den site. We found our first dens in 2003, which coincidentally is when we started up the new soft release protocol. We found 48 dens through 2010, and we're actually able to check off one of those other criteria, that being we were able to document by 2010 third generation kittens. So we had reintroduced lynx that found each other and mated and produced kittens born in the state. That generation of kittens found each other and produced kittens, and that generation of kittens also found mates and produced kittens. So we felt pretty good on that front. So let's talk a little bit about reproduction and how it relates to diet. So this is a figure of snowshoe hare density in spruce fir habitat through a time series that runs from summer of 2006 through winter of 2009. This is pretty typical of what hares do, and sort of how their ecology works is they tend to sort of cycle or fluctuate. So we have high densities, the densities decrease and kind of bottom out, and then they start to recover again. And here's what happens with lynx, which is also pretty typical everywhere we find lynx and hares. In this first summer, relatively high density, we found lots of dens, lots of kittens. Everyone was feeling good about life. And then we realized that snowshoe hare numbers were starting to drop on us. The next summer, we put forward the same amount of effort, looked and monitored females, could not come up with any dens or any kittens. The next summer, snowshoe hare numbers were even more bleak. And again, we looked, no dens, no kittens. The summer following this time series, when it looks like things were recovering on the snowshoe hare end of things, lo and behold, we found dens and we found kittens all over again. Okay, so snowshoe hares are the primary prey, and they're also obviously incredibly important in terms of supporting lynx in their quest to try to pull off litters. When snowshoe hare numbers dive, they replace in their diet with red squirrels. They survive on that just fine. It's not like a whole bunch of lynx died when this happened. They're all in good body condition. They can live just fine off of a diet heavy in red squirrels, but they can't pull off litters if there's too many red squirrels in the diet or too few hares. All right. So we had some survival information over 10 years. We had some productivity information, including this interesting cyclical stuff that's related to hare numbers and squirrel proportion in the diet. So what we did at the end of 10 years is put all that information together in a population projection model. And we just said, what if we start at year 1 with 50 males, arbitrarily, just sort of theoretically, 50 males and 50 females. And we combine the survival data and the productivity data and let that all play out and project that forward, just as we had observed it the previous 10 years, what would happen. And this is what would happen. Lynx numbers, both males and females, would cycle up and down following that snowshoe hare cycle. But the encouraging part, if you notice that each peak is slightly higher than the preceding peak in the time series. Okay, so this was our evidence that we did actually have productivity outstripping mortality. And our best guess at this point in time, based on all the data we collected, is that this population was in fact at least stable, if not projected to be increasing slightly through time.
Females seem to be doing a lot better than the males.
Yep, and that's just due to slight differences in male versus female survival rates. Yep, that's why. So if we go back to our criteria, we had checked off the first couple. We finally found some release protocols after some stumbles that got us what we want. Long-term survival was pretty good. We did have fidelity to decent areas in Colorado, and within that, fidelity to nice patches of forest habitat within the state. We certainly documented breeding and reproduction and kittens actually breeding. And then of course, what I just showed you is evidence that recruitment was greater than mortality. So we checked all the boxes and did everything that we said we were going to do. And that led us in 2010 to have the press release and pat ourselves on the back and say, man, this actually worked. And we think, we have what we set out to get. Since then, I just want to go through a couple more slides. We've switched our focus over into non-invasive monitoring to continue to monitor this investment and make sure that they're staying on the landscape, in perpetuity, hopefully. The way that we're doing that, we go back to where lynx like to hang out. So far, we're focused in the sort of main core habitat in the San Juans in the Southwest. So we zoomed into that. All these squares are home range sized cells that overlap all of the lynx habitat in the San Juans. The colored squares are the random sample that we've selected to actually monitor. Blue squares are are areas where we conduct snow tracking surveys every winter, and that's what we would like to do, because the probability of detecting lynx if they're there with snow tracking is quite high. In places that we can't snow track because they're in wilderness or they're not accessible or too dangerous are the orange squares, and that's where we put out cameras every winter to try to monitor lynx that way. Camera setups look like this. So we have a remote camera hanging on a tree, fairly high up in a tree, pointed over here at a lure tree where we have both a kind of a high and a low lynx lure. And the idea is we put these out in the fall, we let them run all winter, collect them in the spring, and what you're hoping for is a bunch of photos that look like this, or maybe like this. In those blue units, we ride around on snowmobiles and just cover as much ground as we can in those units, and you're hoping to cut, lynx tracks, and this is what they look like. Another interesting little tidbit, a lot of times tracks are blown in, covered up with fresh snow. It can be difficult to tell from the prints on top of the prints what you are actually looking at. But a lot of people don't realize is if you dig up the prints, okay, so dig down into the snow and swish off all of the loose snow, any animal that walks on snow leaves a compression signature underneath that. This is what a lynx compression signature looks like. It's very wide, but shallow. And that's because they have those gigantic feet that act like snowshoes, and all of their weight just sort of stays at the surface and moves outward. Okay. So this, you can dig up these, even if you can't tell what it is from the top, you have a good idea that it was a lynx based on what's under the snow. In contrast, this is what the compression signature would look like for a red fox or a coyote or whatever. All that weight on that small foot just gets pushed straight down into the snow. So interesting little tidbit if you're ever out in the woods and can't decide what you're looking at, maybe look under the snow and you can get some clues there. We go back to the same map. These are the same squares that have been selected for sampling. Now I've changed the color coding on you. The gray squares are areas where we've looked for 6-7 years now and have never detected lynx. The green ones, we have detected lynx. The darker the green, the more years in a row we've detected them. So you can see there's kind of a band of habitat through the high country in the spine of the San Juans where most of the lynx are hanging out down there. We can run that stuff through models, estimate occupancy. So the proportion of all the San Juans that we think have lynx in them, that's about a third of those cells have lynx. And through the years, that's remained pretty darn constant. That's what these solid markers down here indicate. The open markers are sort of the growth rate between years. It's this number divided by this number divided by this number. And you can see they're all sort of pegged here right at about 1.0, which is sort of perfect stability. Each number is about the same as the number preceding it. So what the evidence suggests so far, at least in the San Juans, is that the population is in fact stable, just like we had hoped it would be. And we're going to continue this for a few more years so that we'll have done it for a full decade, gotten through a cycle of the hare stuff. And by the time we get done, it'll be almost 3 decades since we released the initial individuals. Also wanted to mention, this is what we've been monitoring so far, are the San Juans where these green cells are. Next year, we're going to be expanding that and take our first look at kind of the whole state and get a snapshot to see, if there are other places that we have lynx that we haven't looked in a while. So all the blue cells we're going to be looking at in this next winter. So what does the future hold? Obviously, climate change is something of interest with respect to lynx biology, because they are so obviously adapted to deep, soft snow and cold climates and high elevation and all of that stuff. Specifically with climate change, obviously beetles are of potential interest, especially in Colorado. We've done a lot of research on the impacts of bark beetle, both to snowshoe hares, red squirrels, and lynx themselves. And honestly, I think lynx are going to survive this thing pretty well. And in fact, as time marches on and those forests sort of recover and you get thick understory in the forest, I think we're probably going to have more hares, more hare habitat than we've had in a long time. And this may turn out in another few decades to be a good thing for lynx. Fire is, the wild card we worry about every year. Fire is not a good thing. We've had some huge fires in this state, obviously, and a couple of big fires in the wrong places would really put a dent in our lynx population. And we'll just, I guess, cross our fingers on that front. I don't know what else you can do. There are other things we worried about: number of days with snow cover, changes to the snowpack and snow depth. Not sure what the impacts of that will be. But the other big wild card out there is human use. Obviously, there's a lot of people in Colorado, growing number of people in Colorado. We all like to be outside doing what we do, which is great on the one hand. But I think, as you'll see from Liz's presentation and Cal's, there are potentially some ramifications to that with respect to lynx. And so with that, I will hand it off. You're next, right?
Thanks, Jake.
Yes, thank you.
So the question is, when they have a litter, how many kittens? The average over all the dens, I think, is 2.2, something like that. So a couple. They can have as many as 4. Yeah, but roughly 2 is how many survive. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In avalanche use? No, I think you're right. A lot of that does look like avalanche debris, and some of it is. We found dens in avalanche chutes as well as outside too. Some of that's just, blow down and downdrafts and things like that as well. That I know of, we've not lost lynx in avalanches, but I'm sure it's happened or it will at some point. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Lynx, bobcat.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me a little bit of a?
What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, is that a competitor? I'm looking.
Yeah, you're asking how to tell them apart, or is it going to compete?
Bobcats after the same thing?
That's a great question. Generally, lynx and bobcats don't compete that much because lynx live above them in elevation. Well, no, above them in elevation. So they're adapted to the deeper, softer snow, and bobcats can't handle that. So they've sort of been spatially segregated by elevation, in temperature and that kind of thing. And they do feed on slightly different species as well. But I will say more recently in a lot of our other trapping efforts, we are starting to see more bobcats up in higher lynx country. And bobcats are the more aggressive species for sure. And so when that happens, you tend to eventually lose the lynx. Yep. Yep. Predators of lynx, you know, they do pretty well. They survive a long time. They can live even 15 years or more in the wild. But when things do get them, yeah, mountain lions can get them. If they're sick and old and not doing well, we've had coyotes get them. But the wolf reintroduction stuff, you know, I'm sure that a wolf could or would take a lynx at some point. But wolves and lynx overlap a lot in other places, and it just really isn't that much of an issue for them. Yep. And I think for similar reasons, you know, wolves are generally not up that high in that deep of snow for a lot of the year. And so lynx are kind of up there by themselves. I mean, there's lynx, squirrels, ptarmigan, hares, and martins, and really nothing else. So yeah, skiers. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What is the social structure of that soft structure? Were they like all together in an enclosure, or?
They were kind of all together, you know, every lynx was in a separate cell. But the social structure, they're fairly solitary, and they're pretty territorial. So a male home range is bigger, almost twice as big as a female, and his home range generally overlaps a couple of females. The females generally don't overlap each other. So in any given piece of ground, you might have a couple females and a male, but that's kind of it. You don't have much more than that. Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to. I assume at some place back on the evolutionary tree. I mean, they're both cats, so sure. But they're most closely related to bobcats in North America. There's Iberian lynx in Europe, Eurasian lynx in Europe. They're most closely related to those three species for sure. Yeah.
Do you see a lot of roadkill?
You know, early on we had more roadkill. Lately, in the last 10 years, not much at all. And I think some of that is attributed to, you know, them having established home ranges and knowing where they are and being. We've actually done some research looking at highway crossings of lynx, and they're pretty darn good at it. They cross way more often than you might think, and they do that pretty well. But part of it too is we don't have many lynx collared anymore. We don't have any lynx collared on the air anymore. So part of the reason I think we don't see roadkill is if it happens, we probably don't know. Whereas before, anytime a lynx died, we knew it. Yep. So I think they're better at it, and probably some of it is we just don't know.
Thanks a lot again.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Look how fancy we are. It worked.
Okay. Wow. We've had such great information from Jake regarding the reintroduction, which sets me up perfect for why and how we started this study. And then thank you for the Vail Pass introduction. I actually didn't know all of that stuff that you talked about, so that was really interesting. So let me back up a little bit. At the time that they were working on the reintroduction, I was working in Minturn actually as a wildlife biologist in winter sports. And my job was to work with the ski areas and the developments, and then kind of understand how all wildlife, including lynx, overlapped that kind of use. So that's how this all kind of came about. I spent many days in the back bowls of Vail tracking lynx just outside Blue Sky Basin. And I started in 2002 all the way up until we did this study. So, and we found lynx. We found lynx about 5 years into lynx tracks. And so we knew based on the reintroduction that we had few animals that were living in the Vail Pass, Vail area, but we didn't really know how they were living with all of that recreation. And then when the reintroduction program was deemed a success, we had management direction that we needed to abide to. And so we needed to figure out how recreation, developed dispersed, overlapped the lynx that were living in the area. So Jake and myself, and then 2 Rocky Mountain Research Station biologists out of Missoula, John Squires and Lucretia Olson, and then Mark Hubblewhite out of the University of Montana, we put together this recreation study that I will take you through. So the big goal was to understand this overlap and the details of the overlap, recreation and lynx. And how do they overlap in a ski area? Should we be managing for them in the ski area? And how do they overlap in a place like Vail Pass? It was a recreation area that nobody had seen in lynx habitat. That didn't happen in Montana. That didn't happen in Canada. It wasn't as heavily recreated at the time down in the San Juans. And so we didn't really have a basis to understand that overlap. So we were going to start diving into it. So our first objective was to look at the ski area piece. We had management direction that required us to manage for them within Vail ski area, within Copper Mountain ski area, within Breckenridge. And so we didn't really know how that worked given the amount of activity that was happening. So all the way down to, should we keep people out of intertrail islands? And we all know that that's almost impossible to do, but that was some of our direction. How do we keep the skiers out of the islands within a ski area? So that was one. And then Vail Pass, this dispersed recreation piece, the intensity and the level of dispersed recreation on our forest was like nowhere else. So we wanted to understand how they were living in that area. And then Jake just mentioned the highway study. We had all these data points. And so we worked on a highway study to understand how they crossed, where they crossed, and what kind of characteristics were beneficial to keep at a crossing. I'm not going to talk about that today. We can talk about that another time. I'll stick with recreation. So here's an image of our study areas. I'm mostly going to focus on Vail Pass since that's the purpose of this discussion, but we did move down into the San Juan area to increase our sample size in lynx. At the time we were doing this, it was 2010. We had documented a pair just outside Copper Mountain, and then maybe one other behind Vail. So that was a really small sample size. And talking with Jake and John, we knew we had to move down to other areas to increase that. But I'll keep us focused on Vail Pass this evening. So this is cool because boy, have times changed. We had the question, how do we quantify people outside? Because lynx is one thing. We can put a collar on a lynx and we can tell you everywhere they go. But how do we put a collar on people? And this was before smartphones. I mean, I had a flip phone 2 years into the study, so no one really was tracking themselves. So we decided to try 3 different methods. And the bottom method is one we did. We put in trail counters at all the portals in Vail Pass. So we understood the frequency, the amount of people going in, and the type of recreation. We also flew the whole area and did some imagery of tracks. That didn't work out super great. So we only tried that first year. And then the last is we had these mini GPS units. I'll show you a picture, and we gave them to people that were recreating, and they thought it was really cool. So 1 unit per group. That's what they looked like. Did anyone ever carry one while they were out? Yeah, you did. Okay. And we would record what type of recreation they were doing. We gave it to one person within a 10-person group or however many. So we recorded that. They picked up a point every 5 seconds. And then we had these big drop boxes, these mailboxes all over the place. They could drop their unit. They thought it was really cool because we would email them their track for the day. And they just had never seen it. They could see how high they went in elevation, how fast they went, how far they went. And so it was this incentive to bring our unit back to us, and then we could record their track. We had very funny conversations throughout the years we were doing it about what they were doing. Some people thought we were tracking them. We had to explain to them we would be able to find them if they carried this, but that we needed the unit back so we could have the track. We separated it into different recreation types, as I said, and I won't talk about heli skiing because that was down the San Juans, but that was a big group that we explored down outside the town of Telluride. So I'm going to quickly go through the recreation, and then I'll overlap it with the links. So some of our summaries, here's where our trail counters were, and overlap this. It was really easy to control this at Vail Pass because there's only so many entry points. We knew that our numbers were really high. I think we see about 50,000 users in a winter season, maybe a little more than that now. But you can kind of see it's color coded by amount. The red are the major portals, the Vail Pass side, the Campbell side, and you can see the number of users that would go by those throughout a year. So we're up in the thousands of many of those. And hut users were also included in that. And so we do have those portals, and I have a nice 10th Mountain Division hut track for you that I'll show you. So we understood the weekends were busy. I think now all days are busy. I think it's pretty equal across the board. And then we knew that it was probably busiest midday, but we did have activity very early in the morning and very late in the evening. And so we wanted to be able to record that. And so now we're going back to our cool little GPS units. And this is all the data from both the study areas, or all the study areas. And we collected just over 3 million points of human data. So those, like, pretend it's collars on humans. And so now we have this footprint of how humans recreate in the dispersed recreation areas. And just take a step back with ski areas, we didn't put any trackers in there. We just assumed they were all the trails, all the intertrail islands. They were used pretty frequently, pretty consistently all throughout the season, all day long. So this was just for the dispersed recreation areas. And so here's what some of our pictures look like. And so if I had to guess at the percent, and Cal and Jake, you can help me with this, of the people that we actually tracked, it was less than 10%. So this is just representing a very small amount of the recreation, but then it shows us how people recreate. So this top is snowmobile, pretty much stick to a lot of the trails, and then the open play areas up at Vail Pass. You have your backcountry ski in blue, a lot of up and down. A lot of tracks up one, and then dispersing out in the trees. We'll talk about that. Hybrid. Oh, there's different modes of transportation now, but hybrid would be skiers being pulled or riding on a snowmobile, getting dropped off at a spot, and then skiing through the trees and coming back down to their machine. So that was getting very popular. Snowcat skiing was included in that as well. At the time, we didn't have snow bikes. I think the motorcycle bikes at that time, they weren't up there. So that would be a new one. And then there's just a picture of the heli skiing. A lot of that you dropped up top. They don't end up overlapping the habitat as much because they're up in the alpine. So this data was teaching us a lot. And here's an image of the 10th Mountain Hut. All the huts up at Vail Pass, they were pretty regularly visited, and those hut users were really great about carrying a unit. And so not a lot of hut to hut like there used to be. It's a lot of in and out from those main portals that we were showing. But we had just about 150 samples from the tracks up to the hut. And here's a picture looking south. I-70 is on the bottom there, of all of those different recreation types overlapping. So Vail Pass winter rec area, 55,000 acres. Is that how much it is? When we were managing, before we had this information, we assumed that majority of that area was compacted. And so he was talking about Snowshoe Hare. There was the time we made the correlation where we had heavy compaction, we would have potentially less prey available. When we saw these and we built our model, which I'll show you in a minute, we realized that not every nook and cranny of that 55,000 acres was being used. A lot of it was, but not everything. So we knew that there were pockets in there that these lynx could coexist. We just need to better understand how they were doing that. So as biologists do for wildlife, we build a model to kind of predict and understand how they use their habitat and where they use, what types of habitat they use. Well, because we had collared humans, we were able to build a model to see how we use the landscape and the different recreation modalities. And so I'm going to go through that. I'm not going to read all these details to you, but basically what we did was we took a bunch of different variables similar to what we would do for wildlife, and we cleaned a lot of thousands points of data, and we were able to build these predictive maps of recreation surface based on that type of recreation. So we were able to see where people could go if they eventually would venture out to there in all of Colorado. Here's our different variables. You know, distance from highway, that's a big one for us. You know, we don't venture out very far, believe it or not, especially in the non-motorized realm. If we are in a snowmobile, we're of course going to go a lot further. Elevation, canopy, evergreen, green index, which aspects, you know, he had commented that the best lynx habitat, these north-facing spruce fir. Well, that's the best skiing habitat too. So we knew that there would be overlap in those areas. So we wanted to look at that temperature, road density, forest edge. So those were our variables we used to build this model. And I won't go too many details. I want to show you some of the maps that were the product of that. So we have two types of snowmobiling. We have it on the road and then off the road. We have those open play areas. So we were able to kind of build these maps. And the red, the warmer color, indicates a higher probability of that type of activity happening in that particular area. So you can kind of see how the on-road and off-road differs. And then if we move on to our hybrid snowmobile, hybrid ski, we separated that out. So where is the snowmobile going? And when they drop them off, where are the skiers going? And so we were able to build those surfaces. And then our last one was our backcountry skiers. We see our backcountry skiers kind of go everywhere. I go everywhere that's safe, avalanche safe, right? So we see a lot more use on that. So I wanted to kind of set that up before I dive into the lynx data, because this is a really important piece. In order for us to understand how lynx are coexisting or negatively being influenced by humans, we had to understand how humans move on the landscape. And I do know that that's changed from now, or from then to now, and we're going to try and figure out how to calculate that. So we had a different collar than what the state was using during the introduction program. We put on a GPS collar, so it would be similar to what the humans were doing, is where the data points were being collected very frequently, and it was more precise movement data, because we really wanted to get to that recreation piece and that influence, especially in the ski areas. So we had a GPS collar put on, and it collected a point every 20 minutes, 24 hours a day. And our goal was to get the collars on in the early winter. Cal will talk all about how we did that, and then allow them to be run all the way through the spring. And we actually had data running until June on some of our collars. Oh, go ahead.
Why every 20 minutes? Why not once an hour?
We really wanted to get those precise movements around the ski areas. That was really important to us. We had a lot of management questions and challenges that we really couldn't answer till we better understood how they were moving. The collars were programmed. There was a release on them. So after, gosh, I don't know, maybe June, July, they were programmed to release. Jake's team got up. They also had the satellite connection to them, so they were able to go kind of hear where they had dropped, and then we would go in and retrieve them. We actually had to get the collar back to get the data. Nowadays, I think they make collars that you can upload data. This was back in the old days, 10 years ago, right? So we went all over the place trying to find these teeny black and brown collars in the middle of the forest in the summer, but we found them. And so we'll move through this. So over the course of 3 or 4 winters, we were able to collar 18 lynx in 2 different study areas, and we had an even number of males and females. And we collected about 64,000 GPS points for lynx over Colorado. Again, our sample focus was really that January to March, because lynx are in their home range. They're not doing their big walkabouts like Jake was talking about. They're moving more fine scale movements. And so that, again, when our heaviest recreation is and so we want to understand that. So here are our lynx points. We were talking about our humans points. Here's our GPS lynx points from the 2. Oh, this is just the Vail Pass study area. And I'm including, we went down kind of by Turquoise Lake and Leadville on our last year to increase our sample size. So that's also in here too. So now that we've built this resource selection function for humans to understand how they recreate in the landscape, we also have one built for lynx with this GPS data. So now we can actually overlap them and look at these influences. So here's habitat selection. These aren't the greatest maps. We won't dive into this too much because I've got better pictures coming. But between lynx and recreation, you know, we have our different modalities of recreation, and then we have our GPS from lynx. There is a lot of overlap here. So now we're going to dive into that fine scale overlap. Oh, then we won't go over that. Those were the different variables and how they overlapped. Movement and behavior. Are we influencing how they move? This was a big question, and there is a paper written on this, and it was really interesting. We made a lot of assumptions. We assumed motorized recreation would have much more of a negative effect than non-motorized. We made these assumptions because we didn't know. And so what we learned was, oh, here we go. So lynx slowed their movement in the presence of a lot of snowmobile activity. So they kind of hunkered down, they would stay in these pockets, and they wouldn't run away from the activity. They would just really slow down, and sometimes just they're curious, watch it. In these really high hybrid areas. So we talked about how the snowmobilers would bring out all these skiers, and the skiers would then go ski the best north facing habitat. Well, lynx were also in that best north facing habitat. So we see the biggest influence in that hybrid group. And it would be the group that gets off the snow machine and then skis. They're further back away from that highway. We're talking about highway portals and distance. And so these hybrid skiers were able to get a lot further. So lynx would move faster. They would move away from that. Lynx in Vail avoided areas with greater snowmobile intensity within 1 kilometer. Well, that was much different down the San Juans. Different intensity, different level, different landscape. We talked about the hybrid use, and then they, lynx like to use packed trails. So we would see them a lot just outside the packed trails, especially hut users. And so now this is the trail going up to Janet's, this blue line, this backcountry skier. So we're looking, this is Copper Mountain right here. When the lynx were first reintroduced, there was a pair that actually came up in between Vail Pass and Copper Mountain and had stayed there for almost 10 years, I think. And so here, this represents 2 to 3 animals. I can't remember, sorry. And they kind of move all the way through, but you can see there's really not a whole lot of use happening within the ski area right here. And these points that you're seeing in the ski area are not happening during operation hours during the winter. So here's that. Now here's the overlap between, okay, I-70, Copper Mountain's over there. So now this is north, south. So this green is this hybrid use. And so you get the snowmobiles coming up here, and then the hybrid skiers in here, and you can see them partitioning themselves. There really isn't a ton of overlap there. The habitat's the same. The habitat isn't different. The human use is different. So we see this influence here. And that was the biggest contrast that we saw in the Vail Pass area. Otherwise, they really are coexisting and separating themselves for these two activities. Lynx are finding these pockets where humans may not be, but they're overlapping a little bit too. So some of the conclusions is that we learned that they do tolerate this level of winter activity. It's not like anywhere else in Colorado that I know of, though that is changing. They segregate from motorized recreation based on habitat, which makes sense. You don't see a lot of snowmobilers in that kind of habitat, that north facing slope. However, you do see snow bikes in there now. So I think this would be different if we had a data set on there. They use similar habitats than non-motorized. That blue line was up by the hut users skiing up in that area. So, and things for me as a manager that I look at is canopy cover, complexity, function, horizontal cover. All those things are really important. We showed that those are still very important for them to coexist. This was a big question and a really hard one to answer. How do they use developed skiers? Well, we collar them all around developed skiers because they never went in there. So it was actually really hard for us to understand them in there when winter skiing was happening. So we make the assumption that there's a threshold there. There's that we've reached that threshold. There are so many people in there all the time that they're not going to go in there during those winter operation hours. So we do say that they do avoid ski areas, especially Vail, Copper. We had one collared on the backside of Telluride, and there was a little bit more use, but really not a whole lot. The home range did overlap the ski area, but it wasn't in, it was kind of a similar pattern in there. Okay. Some of the things that we think about and that we are considering in management based on this study is that there was really a limited response down in the San Juans as far as that overlap, no change in activity levels. In the Vail Pass level, a much stronger response, avoid moist, intense recreated areas, ski areas, decreased activity in the daylight hours, which we knew they weren't as active, but they were far more active in the night hours up in the North study. And then 2 lynx that completely avoided all types of recreation. And then ski areas, we do conclude that they do avoid ski areas. That was a big one for us to better understand, especially because some of our current, at the time, our management direction were that we had to manage for them within the ski area. That didn't make any sense if they're avoiding the ski area. So now what, right? This study was done in 2010 to 2013. It is so different out there now. The number of people recreating in dispersed areas is increased tremendously. The number of people recreating, starting in a ski area, but leaving an access point of a ski area and going to the backcountry is increasing tremendously. We were trying to quantify that a little bit. It was tough. The access points were changing, but you didn't have a ton of people. There were some like set trails, like the Minturn Mile or something like that. But now you have dispersed skiing happening with the vector being the ski area, the lifts, getting up there and then leaving. So and that's happening with all of our ski areas here on the White River. And now people have smartphones. They're not going to want to carry a GPS unit. So we got to figure out how to quantify that recreation data. And so here's some of the management implications that we consider and are continuing. We want to figure out a better way to track this dispersed recreation. So we're having conversations about that. We want to manage for lynx and their success so they continue to be successful in Colorado. So those habitat characteristics that we like to ski in, we need to maintain some of those areas. At the time we were doing the study, lynx appear to have an upper threshold of recreation intensity. We didn't know that. Some of the work that was done in Montana, we assumed that they avoided us at all costs and that recreation and lynx couldn't overlap, but this showed us that there's a level that they can. And then the habitat is important, and we need to continue to maintain that and connectivity to allow them to be successful in Colorado. So we do still do a little bit of work. Jake is doing his non-invasive monitoring down the San Juans, and Kim Potter and I, we are doing in Cal some of our non-invasive monitoring here, and we still are finding them. We're still finding them in areas that we collared them back in 2010. And that one is a picture. I think we were on our way towards the Janet's trail there, Janet's hut. We're able to document them with photographs. And then we are also working with the Rocky Mountain Research Station in Montana to collect DNA. So we'll collect the print that Jake showed you. We actually take a portion of that snow, we put it in a bag, we filter it, and then we send that DNA up to a lab in Montana, and they're able to tell us the species. And then if we do get some hair samples or any other scat samples, they can actually tell us if it's a male or female. So, and we did send this to Jake about a year ago. We have a female and her young in that same area. So I believe that's the same picture that you had of them crossing at the top of the pass. Yeah. And that's the end. Anyway. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for a very innovative study.
It was a great study. Yeah.
Very innovative.
Yeah.
I have a quick question, because wasn't the study started because of the expansion of Blue Sky Basin? Was that part of it?
So there when they expanded Blue Sky Basin, there was a mandate to track. So that was part of my assignment, is to go out there, and we had designated some habitat, which we called at the time security habitat. And so that's where I was out tracking to make sure that it was free of skiers. It wasn't free of skiers. Yeah. So, but Breckenridge at the time, they wanted to build Peak 6. We didn't have the management direction that was clear enough to allow us to do that without this. So that was, so, you know, the Blue Sky Basin work and then the expansion of Breckenridge kind of prompted us to get better information and better understand how to manage recreation.
Because the big argument in the community at the time was, that's where the lynx live. You can't go there.
Mhm.
Don't expand the ski area there. There were bumper stickers, cat 3,
Yeah.
2, Vail 1, Vail, or anyway, there were all these, it was a big,
It was.
so but it, from like what you just said, though, it sounds like that they don't want to live where they're recreating. So they don't live there. But were they there before?
So the time that was happening was 99, 2000, same time they started the reintroduction. They, the last trap record was on Vail, in actually the front side, kind of over by Mill Creek is where they think they trapped the last one. We don't know if they were there. So we knew that snowshoe hare were there though. So we knew we had a very solid prey base in that area, so that if lynx were coming up and establishing home ranges, we knew they had their primary prey there. So some of the old trail maps used to have all the security areas mapped in there, like can't ski in there, big thing. I think it even said lynx security area at one point. And then it switched to wildlife security area. So my job was to go into all of those areas to see whether or not it was human skiing and a security area. And there were a couple of them that were, but over time, there's just more and more skiing. So yeah. Yep. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we want to round out our panel with Cal. Cal Orlowski was also heavily involved. And Cal has a PowerPoint.
Yep.
Just give us a second.
Yep.
The one that says link.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm Cal Orlowski. I'm a mountain sports ranger out of the Eagle Holy Cross Ranger District here in Minturn. I was fortunate enough to have worked with Liz and Jake for 3 winters on this project. And for a young ski bum, this was like one of the coolest jobs I've ever had, hands down. And I was part of a trapping crew. So we, the other aspect of, we were handing out GPS units to people. We had to capture the lynx first. We had to do this humanely and safely. And so I was tasked with that project, with going out into the woods and looking for tracks and trying to build traps and find some animals out there. So this took, and if you didn't see, this guy or gal was visiting us down in the San Juans. And this is a mixture of photos from Leadville, Vail Pass, and the Silverton area. So yeah, just how we went about, Jake kind of touched on this earlier, but sometimes we're out on backcountry skis, out on snowshoes. Sometimes we're out on snowmobiles. Amazing job. We got to go to some amazing places. We're out there looking for tracks. Once we did find them, we would follow them as far as we could, see where they went, try to understand some of their behavior. And really what we found over time is that lynx would come back to the similar areas over time. So oftentimes if you built a trap on existing tracks, they're likely to come back at some point during the winter. So we would just wander around in the woods looking for tracks. It was a great job, a lot of exercise. Once we did find tracks, you can see we would set up, these are our traps over here on the left. We would try to attract them by hanging grouse wings or CDs with fishing line in meadows that were adjacent to areas that we were actually setting the traps. These things would spin around, attract attention. Think about a house cat wanting to play with a ball of yarn, same kind of idea. And then once we found a suitable location, you can kind of see in this area, these are our traps here. They're pretty simple traps, PVC pipe structures, making that, kind of Pentagon style home for them. Covered that in chicken wire to actually contain them in there. Wrapped that whole thing in plastic and covered it with spruce and fir boughs there to kind of make it feel like a den, I guess is kind of what we're trying to mimic there. And how these traps worked, you can see someone actually way down into the trap there. There's basically a trigger about halfway, 2/3 of the way as you walk into the trap. That would be holding a wire and a pin that went back through the top crossbar. And this, my friend Joe here is holding that pin, and which would really actually hold up this door and that grate there. So animal was interested, they would walk in, eventually hit that pedal right there. That would release the pin from the crossbar there and drop the front door. Pretty simple. Worked pretty well overall. We would have some false traps here and there. When you walk around the corner, you see the door closed, you get really excited and there's nothing in there. Weasels, the wind, anything else that could kind of get in there. The weasels could get in and out. That was like the ultimate trick that they played on us over and over and over. Eat all of our bait and then walk away. So these were often baited with trapped snowshoe hare or collected roadkill. Another interesting part of the job. But yeah, so these were kind of scattered out throughout the woods. With our permit with the state, I believe we were required to check these every day. So we were very active. We're out there. Once we built the traps, we're checking them every day, returning to these same places over and over and over. They would leave all kinds of sign. You see some tracks here, some scat there, and then the middle photo, oftentimes we would see them walk right up to the front door, check it out, and they weren't interested. They'd turn around and walk away. Another kind of funny trick they would play on us over time. I don't really have, just anecdotally, we would notice that oftentimes these animals would avoid these traps until a big storm was coming, or the kind of the meat of the winter where they've had a long snowy winter, they've been struggling to hunt, trying to find prey there, is usually around the time when we would come and find them in the traps. Big snowstorm was coming, the pressure was really dropping there. That's when they would get a little more desperate. Sometimes they just play tricks on you and just watch you from afar, like in Silverton. We would be, looking around for tracks and trying to find a place to trap, and like, oh, well, he's just staring at us right there. And all right, well, maybe we'll try here. But eventually we would find closed doors and animals in there. So here, as you can really see, this is kind of the treadle or the pedal that they would push down, and you can see that wire that's running through the back. Some of our bait in there. Eventually, I feel like most of our trappings, collarings were February and March. Late January is really the earliest, even though we're really trying to get that data set and starting in December. Like I said, it usually wasn't until like the really hard part of the winter we're really having a lot of success trapping a lot of these animals. So once we did get them in there, we would basically wire that shut. We'd make sure if they had already eaten all the bait, we're going to add some bait in there, something that, because they're going to spend the night in there for that night. And then the next day we would call up Jake, Liz, Kim would come help out, all the state biologists, and we would collar and process from there. So these are just a kind of a series of photos kind of just describing that process, right? We would usually build kind of a table out of snow to, basically have a working station onto there. We would use a jab pole that was loaded with sedatives to sedate the animals. So usually you'd have someone in front of the trap kind of distracting one, catching their attention, and someone working around in the back to hit them right in the behind. And they would usually take about 45 minutes or so, 30, 45 minutes until they were fully sedated. At that time, we would pull them out of the trap, put them in a warm place, usually wrap them in some kind of blanket, and kind of begin our processing of the animals. So you can kind of see on the far, I guess that would be your right. That is the final collar that's on there. We're attaching oxygen, monitoring temperature, all of those things, making sure the animal is doing okay. And we're tracking pulses and all that kind of stuff to make sure that it's hanging in there. So you can kind of see here, usually put on a blindfold just to make them a little more comfortable. We've got them on oxygen. We're attaching that collar. Here you can kind of see this was another piece, that light color there in the collar. If the mechanism that Liz was describing, where the release did not work, that would also eventually wear down faster than the leather collar. The middle photo is showing how we would actually weigh the animals. So you just have a hanging scale, you pre-weigh your blanket, wrap them up in the blanket, weigh them out that way. We're often looking at the health of the individuals, looking at their teeth and their dentition, and how they're able to survive, right? That's how a lot of lynx are able to survive and eat. They're using their claws to catch predator or prey. But then obviously if you don't have functioning teeth, you're kind of not doing so well. So that was a big part of the overall health we're looking at. Here we got Liz drawn some blood of the animals. So we would take blood and hair samples. And those would also go back, I believe, to the state and up to the research station. We got pretty good at doing that over time and using some hot tea to kind of tamp down their hair and to be able to find the veins a little easier, to be able to get in there. And monitoring temperature, always a stinky part of the experience. And yeah, so it's just some other really cool photos. Jake holding an actual paw in his two hands to give you an idea of how big their feet actually are. It's very impressive. Like same idea, right? We're out on skis and snowshoes to go float on powder. These individuals and these animals are extremely well adapted to traveling in deep snow. Correct. Yeah. So the way that I've thought about it or described it to people is this is a 20 to 30 pound animal that has the feet the size of a 150 pound mountain lion, if you want to think about it in that way. So it's quite a big difference. So once again, monitoring and looking at a lot of the health of the individual by looking at teeth, their tongue, and doing some simple measurements, attaching the collar, and really documenting everything that we could find out about these animals before they woke up. And that it was a really cool experience to do this because in certain places in the San Juans, and I don't know that we ever saw it at Vail Pass, but in Leadville as well, if you had one of the individuals of a mating pair, the other was often in close proximity. And they'd be calling to each other. You hear this communication between the animals. It was something like I couldn't even describe or attempt to make those noises. Pretty impressive. So it was really a collaborative effort between the state. I was working for the University of Montana at the time and working with the Forest Service and Liz and everyone coming together. We often had biologists, local biologists on those districts come out and check it out as well and be a part of it. Because a lot of this information, they were using for management implications over time. So as we finished our processing of the animal, collaring, all that stuff, try to wrap them in a big furry blanket, a donated sleeping bag there, get them cozy back in the trap and let them recover until they're fully awake, which take another 40 minutes or so. let them relax, kind of get their senses back. But you can tell, you know, the individual on the far side of the screen is not quite awake yet. I think that's Kim carrying that one. And then as they woke up and we felt comfortable, we let them go. Sometimes that was they would, you know, you'd open the door and they'd run out immediately. Other times they would take a little coercing to kind of shoo them out of there. But amazing to watch these animals, you know, kind of thrive and then continue to move on. So it just, these really nice images are actually from Steve Sunday up in Leadville. And pretty impressive to watch these animals walk away. And he captured, this was a collaring up by Turquoise Lake that was really special. And had some amazing photos. So just wanted to share those with you. But yeah, so essentially over time, right, these collars had a dual function, had a GPS that is, you know, storing these GPS points that Liz was talking about, but it also had a radio antenna. So over time, once we had these collars attached, we could identify them and find them with a radio antenna, like doing some simple radio telemetry. And we would actually recapture animals somewhat frequently. We had a pretty large male in the Vail Pass area that, I'm not joking you, we would catch him in the Breckenridge side one day. The next day he would be over by Climax Mine. And then the following day we would catch him over by Copper or Vail Pass. And I think he just figured out, you know, hey, I get a free meal and maybe they knocked me out for a little bit, but everything was fine. And you know, it got old eventually, but it was pretty entertaining there for a while. But they would be a little trap happy in certain instances once they did figure it out. It's a free meal, you know. The snowshoe hare? Yeah, I mean, at that point, like we always had bait in the traps, and so he would show up, and he was a big dominant male in the area, and so he would basically clean out all of our bait. And got a little frustrating because it's hard to find roadkill or snowshoe hares and those kinds of things. So, and once again, we have to check them every day, right? But it was kind of cool because you immediately could know which individual it was because you had that radio receiver. You could just pull it out and immediately identify, dial in that frequency for that animal, and you know exactly who it is. So really fascinating project. I'm very grateful to be a part of it. Yeah, like I said, it was a pretty special thing to be a part of and see all these animals in their natural habitat and be able to understand some of their movement patterns in these areas is pretty special. And as a winter recreationist, I'm definitely part of the problem being out there and everywhere. But it's really cool to see and understand those relationships over time, especially with this study. And there were differences between places like Vail Pass and Silverton, like Liz talked about. And don't really know why. I think it's fascinating in that sense because, you know, it's a much bigger area down there where, you know, Vail Pass is pretty condensed and we've got a lot going on in that area, and, you know, just a handful of animals, where the San Juan mountain range is not really split up by towns or roads and those kinds of things. So I think they have a lot more freedom down there. It's, you know, just observations there, but yeah, it was really amazing to be a part of it. And yeah, happy to answer any questions if anyone has any specifics. Yeah.
What? How long do they live? How much do they weigh?
So they weigh, yeah, about 20, 30 pounds.
That's all.
Yeah,
That's a lot of fur.
they're all leg and hair and paw. Yeah.
20, 30 pounds.
They're pretty
And they live for 10 years?
about.
Yeah, at least 10. We have a number, you know, because we knew what we had. But
Yes.
that lived in Colorado for at least 15 years.
Yeah, and we had even captured, I believe, some that had original collars from the state reintroduction. Yeah.
So when you had them, when they were sedated, if you found like they had an infection in their tooth or something, did you pull that tooth or did you leave it alone?
All the animals that we captured, I think, were in relatively good health. I don't think we had any of those scenarios, but if there was, I'm sure if there was one bad situation, we would likely address. Yeah.
There was one that looked like there was
With the
an
eye?
injury, and they got into it like at the time we were processing elevated body fat. So Dr. Wolf, our veterinarian on that, she ended up giving that one to me about it. But the eye was not functioning. You could see it was an injury. Otherwise, that was the only one that we came across that.
Yeah, I'd say overall health was pretty good. I remember one other animal, just a smaller individual in the Silverton area that was skinny, but you know, we probably added an extra piece of bait in there for them as well. So yeah, overall pretty healthy individuals that we did capture.
So it doesn't seem like they're traumatized, like with human contact, once they're handled and all that. It seems like pretty much easy come, easy go that way.
Relatively, yeah. I mean, I'm sure all of this is stressful for these animals. Absolutely, you know, they
Like they tell you, you know, if you find a wild animal, don't touch it. You know, I've always grown up with that.
absolutely.
So obviously you have a reason for doing this, but it doesn't seem to alter their relationships with each other or anything like that.
Not that we observed. It wasn't really something we were really looking at on this study, but yeah, I mean, all of this is, you know, if you think about putting yourself in the animal situation, it's stressful, right? You're getting trapped, you're in a weird environment. You're stuck in this cage for about, you know, 24 hours. I'm sure there are some lingering effects of that, but for the most part, you know, they ran off and that was the only time they ever dealt with us. It's just that one time.
Except for what's his name?
We named him Bubba, but yeah. He came back a lot. Yeah.
I would add to that too, that one of, you know, lynx, for all the species I work on, are pretty docile animals. I mean, yes, I agree, it's gotta be stressful to some degree, but they kind of just, what you're seeing there, they just sort of hang loose and they don't appear to get super worked up compared to other species that, you know, flying back and forth and running themselves in the walls, breaking through training. It's definitely stressful. These guys just seem to sort of chill out.
Yeah, I have a lot of old videos of, you know, them just kind of like this individual here, just kind of tucking back and just kind of laying low, and maybe you'll hear him a low growl or something like that, but very, very rarely was it like aggressive or, you know, erratic and within these traps here. So
The very first presentation, you alluded to how it's Colorado's belief that these are native, but there are some who don't. How prevalent is that opposing belief? Is there a group of scientists who think everything we just heard is insane and this is like bringing elephants to Colorado?
No, I mean, I don't think there's any, there's no doubt that there were lynx here. We have records of that. The question is, was that a resident viable population? And so the counter argument, which I don't totally disagree with, is we know that lynx cycle, for sure. In the far north, the eruptions are huge, and then they crash. And when the eruptions get huge, there's sort of a surplus of lynx, and you can see over time, if you mapped out all those locations over time, you would see these influxes and then no lynx, and then influxes and lynx, and that's the overflow coming from Canada. And so the thought is that you just get this ebb and flow of animals from north of the border, and left to their own devices, lynx would eventually just blink out this far south. And the only reason they were ever here is because they were getting that overflow. So we'll find out, you know, if we keep monitoring for decades, and, you know, maybe they will eventually blink out, and that will support the idea that they need that influx. But if they keep sort of hanging around like they've been hanging around, then you know, there's enough here to sustain them. So those are sort of the two competing ideas. I don't know how we'll ever, you know, you would ever know for sure how it all worked 200 years ago. But those are the two.
It would be a natural process no matter what. It's not like they were, you know, brought by some group or something. Like
No. It was all a natural process for sure. But the worry there too is those huge cycles and eruptions in Canada kind of fall apart. No one knows exactly why, but it doesn't happen to the same degree anymore. So I think the other concern is if we do lose them here, especially with a lot of people and development between here and Canada, that we may not get replenished anytime soon.
Thanks, Cal.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks for showing us and very interesting pictures how research works
Yeah.
So that's also quite important for us to understand. Okay. Thanks. The whole series of presentation, I think they came together. And thanks for coming to Vail. Thanks for inviting us.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for all for coming. And it was a good way to end our program series. So I have to say they're the cutest things I've ever seen. Their feet. Yeah, so thank you. And yeah, Rudy, I'll get with you. Maybe we'll think of something for next year. This is the second time Rudy's been here. So we talked about climate change. So Rudy and I will come up with another topic for next season. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for those on Zoom, and thank you for being members and supporting the museum. So we are, yeah, we're the heartbeat of our community is what we kind of think right now. So it's a fun place. So visit whenever you can. So thank you. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone who came.